"We don't need a maintenance worker. We need a systems specialist." The words dripped from Staff Sergeant Derek Brooks's lips like acid, each syllable designed to cut. A few of the younger airmen, hungry to align with the man who controlled their daily fate, released muffled chuckles that echoed through the vast hangar at Whiteman Air Force Base. Dr. Rebecca Hayes said nothing. She didn't look at Brooks, didn't acknowledge the laughter rippling through the cavernous space. Her eyes remained fixed on the imposing steel door of the equipment vault, standing like a digital fortress that had defeated every attempt at entry. She simply reached out and accepted the mop handle he thrust toward her, her grip steady, her expression unreadable. Her silence seemed to absorb the insults, leaving no trace of wounded pride. But across the hangar, Colonel James Thompson, visiting to oversee the critical mission launch, paused mid-conversation with his aide. He watched the way her fingers, calloused from years of precision work, curled around the worn wood handle. He noticed how she stood, not bent in defeat, but with perfect posture, her weight distributed with an economy of movement he recognized from decades of military service. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, the way she surveyed the vault's perimeter with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. Her breathing remained controlled, measured, the mark of someone comfortable under pressure. If you believe true expertise speaks through quiet competence, not loud proclamation, type quiet in the comments. Because what happened next would prove that real professionals never need to announce their arrival. The 40-year-old woman turned and began to work, the rhythmic swish of the mop head against polished concrete becoming the only sound in a room thick with unspoken judgment. Each stroke was perfectly parallel, each turn executed with military precision. There was no wasted motion, no hint of resentment, just the calm efficiency of someone who had learned that dignity couldn't be taken, only surrendered. But what they didn't realize about this quiet contractor would shock them all, because Rebecca Hayes wasn't just any civilian specialist sent from headquarters. The situation was beyond critical. The state-of-the-art M-lock security system protecting the squadron's most sensitive equipment had been locked down for 4 agonizing hours. Not just offline, completely frozen, a digital ghost that had sealed away millions in mission-critical guidance systems and specialized munitions. Brooks and his elite technical team had thrown everything at it, power cycles, remote overrides, diagnostic protocols until their eyes burned from screen glare. They had consulted classified technical manuals, contacted manufacturer support, even attempted emergency bypass procedures that required 3-level authorization. Every attempt met the same mocking response, a single red light that seemed to taunt their expertise. The mission timeline was unforgiving. The sortie was tied to satellite trajectories and theater-level strategic objectives that couldn't be delayed. Without the targeting pods and specialized guidance systems locked in that vault, the F-16s on the flight line were just very expensive, very loud paperweights. Command was breathing down everyone's necks, and the visiting colonel's presence only amplified the pressure. When headquarters had dispatched this unremarkable woman in simple blue coveralls, no name tag, no rank insignia, no obvious credentials, Brooks saw it as a personal insult. She looked more like a lost contractor than the high-level specialist they desperately needed. His decision to hand her a mop wasn't just dismissive. It was a declaration of territorial dominance in his domain. But her calm acceptance of the demeaning task unsettled him. She worked with methodical precision, each movement deliberate and efficient, displaying a composure that hinted at depths he couldn't fathom. The way she moved suggested muscle memory formed over years of disciplined practice, and Colonel Thompson found himself watching her with growing curiosity. Little did they know that this humble cleaning method was actually Rebecca conducting her own diagnostic assessment, using the repetitive motion to mask her careful study of the vault's external systems. What they didn't realize was that Rebecca had been analyzing the vault's design with expert eyes, noting stress patterns in the steel, listening to the subtle electronic hums that spoke of system conflicts, observing details that Brooks's conventional training had never taught him to recognize. What happened next would shock everyone in that hangar and prove that sometimes the most qualified person in the room is the one being ignored. The pressure in the hangar mounted with every passing minute. Colonel Thompson strode across the polished floor, his boots echoing with quiet authority. He had commanded troops in 3 combat zones and managed crises that would break lesser officers, but the sight of millions in equipment sealed away by a malfunctioning system while precious mission time ticked away was testing even his legendary composure. "Staff Sergeant Brooks," he said, his voice low but cutting through the tension like a blade. "Status report. The window is closing. Is the specialist making any progress?" The question was a command disguised as a query. Brooks felt his face flush with the heat of public failure. He turned, his jaw tight with frustration, and barked across the hangar. "All right, specialist, you're up. Let's see what Headquarters' infinite wisdom sent us." Rebecca stopped mopping. She didn't hurry or show any sign of pressure. She carefully placed the mop against the wall, ensuring it was perfectly upright and secure, a small detail that spoke to ingrained habits of precision. Then she walked toward the silent steel monolith, carrying no tools, no diagnostic tablet, no equipment of any kind. The assembled airmen watched with a mix of curiosity and lingering skepticism. How could this unassuming woman succeed where their entire technical team had failed? The hangar fell into a deafening silence, broken only by the distant hum of ventilation systems and the subtle electronic whir of the vault's failed security protocols. But what the colonel saw next changed everything, because the technique Rebecca was approaching was something he hadn't witnessed in over 15 years of military service. She didn't even glance at the unresponsive digital keypad with its mocking red light. Instead, she approached the door itself, her eyes scanning the seams where heavy plate steel met reinforced titanium frame. Her movements were those of someone reading a complex technical blueprint written in metal and circuits. The intuition within every seasoned warrior in that room began to whisper of recognition. There was something in the absolute stillness of her head as she surveyed the lock mechanism. The way she ran her bare fingertips over the cold metal surface, not as a caress, but as a precision instrument reading microscopic variations in temperature and vibration that spoke of internal system conflicts. Her breathing remained slow, deliberate, a study in absolute calm under pressure that Colonel Thompson recognized from only the most elite military specialists he'd encountered in his career. Because the truth about Rebecca's specialized training was even more extraordinary than anyone could imagine. Then she began. It wasn't a conventional repair attempt or diagnostic procedure. It was a rhythm, a series of soft but precisely calibrated taps with the heel of her hand on specific points of the door frame, far from any electronic interface. Tap, 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 tap. It was a language of vibration, a physical conversation with the mechanical soul of the security system. The airmen stared in confusion. Brooks scoffed under his breath, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What is this? Some kind of percussion maintenance?" But Colonel Thompson watched with widening eyes, a buried memory sparking to life in his mind. He had seen this technique once before, years ago, during a classified briefing about specialized military engineering protocols developed for the most sensitive installations. Rebecca shifted her position with fluid precision, her trained fingers finding a tiny, almost invisible seam near the primary magnetic actuator housing. The location was unmarked, invisible unless you knew exactly where the original architects had placed emergency access points during the system's development phase. She pressed one finger firmly into the microscopic joint, applying pressure with the exactitude of someone who understood the internal mechanisms down to individual components. Then, with her other hand positioned at a specific unmarked point on the doorframe, she delivered a final, perfectly calibrated strike. The impact wasn't violent. It was surgical. A deep, resonant thunk emanated from within the vault's mechanism, the sound of immense internal pressure being instantly and precisely released. The mocking red light on the control panel blinked once, twice, then died completely. With a soft hiss of equalizing air pressure, the massive steel door, weighing over 2 tons and secured by mechanisms that had defied 4 hours of expert attempts, swung inward with majestic silence. For a full 10 seconds, the only movement in the hangar was the slow, almost ceremonial swing of the vault door opening to reveal the mission-critical equipment within. The silence was absolute, a vacuum where snickers and arrogance had once existed. What they found next was impossible according to every technical manual in existence, and what the colonel discovered would change everything they believed about expertise. Staff Sergeant Brooks stood frozen, his mouth agape, the condescending retort he'd been preparing dissolving on his tongue. He looked from the open vault to Rebecca and back again, his mind, so accustomed to flowcharts and technical procedures, unable to process what he had just witnessed. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. "That's impossible. There is no manual override protocol. There is no physical bypass system." He took a step forward, staring at the door frame as if expecting to find hidden mechanisms or secret panels. There was nothing, just smooth, impenetrable steel that had somehow yielded to knowledge he didn't possess. Rebecca stood quietly by the now accessible vault, her work complete. She hadn't broken the system. She had spoken to it in a language that Brooks, for all his technical training and official authority, didn't know existed. Colonel Thompson moved first. He strode past the shell-shocked Brooks, his eyes locked on Rebecca with a deep, profound respect that had replaced his earlier curiosity. He stopped directly in front of her, ignoring the now accessible equipment that his mission desperately needed. "Classified Engineering Division," the colonel said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. "I haven't seen the harmonic access protocol used in 15 years, not since my liaison assignment with special projects." He turned to his aide, a young captain clutching a secure data tablet. "Captain, pull up the classified file for our dispatched specialist, authorization code Tango 7 Alpha 9. The captain's fingers flew across the encrypted interface. His face paled as the file loaded, his eyes widening with each line of restricted information. He looked up, his voice hushed with awe and growing understanding. "Sir, the file is heavily redacted. Name, Dr. Rebecca Hayes, age 40. Security clearance, Obsidian level. Unit affiliation, classified. Previous assignments, multiple redacted entries spanning 12 years. He swallowed hard before continuing, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, there's only one notation in the special qualifications section. It reads, Lead Design Architect and Primary Field Implementation Specialist." The hangar seemed to contract around them. Colonel Thompson looked at Dr. Hayes with the dawning realization that they weren't dealing with a maintenance contractor or even a systems specialist. They were in the presence of the ghost who had designed the very vault that had defied them. What the classified file revealed left the colonel speechless, because Rebecca wasn't just familiar with the system, she had created it. The revelation settled over the assembled airmen like a physical weight. The woman they had watched mop their floor, the contractor they had dismissed and ridiculed, wasn't just a technician. She was the architect, the original creator of the security system that protected America's most sensitive military technology. She hadn't bypassed her own system. She had used its most fundamental hidden feature, an emergency access protocol known only to its original designer and a handful of the highest-level military engineers in the country. Colonel Thompson, a man who wore his rank with the easy authority of 3 decades in uniform, slowly and deliberately came to the position of attention. The gesture, a formal mark of respect from a flag officer to a civilian, carried more weight than any salute. It was acknowledgement of expertise that transcended military hierarchy. "Dr. Hayes," he said, his voice resonating with genuine gratitude. "On behalf of the 44th Fighter Squadron and this mission, thank you. You saved not just our timeline, but potentially lives that depend on this operation." He then turned, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of every person in that hangar until it settled with laser focus on Brooks. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Staff Sergeant," the colonel's voice was now forged from ice and steel, "assumptions are the enemy of readiness. True competence doesn't always wear chevrons or announce its credentials. Sometimes it carries a mop, waiting to see who in the room possesses the wisdom to recognize excellence versus who simply holds temporary authority. The lesson landed with devastating precision. Brooks felt the eyes of every airman under his command, saw the mixture of shock and newfound understanding on their faces. His authority, built on loud confidence and technical bravado, had been exposed as hollow performance. The story of the incident spread through Whiteman Air Force Base not like gossip, but like a fundamental shift in understanding. It became known as the Hayes Protocol, both the technical procedure she had demonstrated and the cultural lesson she had taught. In mess halls and maintenance bays, the tale was told and retold, each telling polishing the legend of the quiet civilian who opened the unbreakable vault with nothing but knowledge and composed professionalism. It became a parable about the danger of assumptions, a reminder that the most unassuming person in any room might possess the most critical expertise. Brooks's transformation wasn't documented in his personnel file, but it was written in his actions. The arrogance was gone, replaced by earned humility. He was seen consulting junior mechanics, listening to contractor suggestions with an intensity he had never shown before. The loudest man in the hangar had finally learned the value of quiet observation and respect for competence regardless of its packaging. Dr. Rebecca Hayes deflected all attempts at recognition or publicity. She spent 2 hours inside the vault conducting comprehensive diagnostics, her fingers moving over internal systems with the same fluid precision she had displayed while mopping. She identified a microscopic stress fracture in a secondary power coupling that would have caused complete system failure within weeks, a flaw that only the original architect could have detected. She submitted her technical report, briefed the colonel with precise, understated professionalism, and prepared to leave as quietly as she had arrived. As she walked toward the hangar exit, a young airman, one of those who had laughed loudest at Brooks's initial dismissal, jogged to intercept her. His face carried a mixture of shame and newfound respect. "Ma'am, Dr. Hayes," he stammered. I apologize for our behavior. That was wrong." He took a breath and asked the question everyone wanted answered. "How did you know exactly where to apply pressure? How did you know that technique would work?" She paused, offering the faintest hint of a smile, the first crack in her stoic, professional demeanor they had witnessed. "The designer," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "always leaves a key under the mat. You just have to understand the architecture." With that simple statement, she turned and walked into the Missouri sunlight, disappearing as quietly as she had arrived, leaving behind a legacy of earned respect and cultural transformation that would outlast her brief visit. Months later, the entire culture of the 44th Fighter Squadron had fundamentally evolved. New personnel, whether civilian contractors or fresh enlisted airmen, were greeted with baseline professional courtesy. Their ideas were solicited, their expertise evaluated on merit rather than appearance or credentials. Brooks, now genuinely respected rather than feared, used the vault as a teaching tool for young NCOs. He would point to the smooth, unmarked spot on the doorframe where Rebecca had applied her precise pressure. "That," he would say, "is the Hayes point. It's there to remind us that the most powerful asset in the Air Force isn't the technology in this vault. It's the knowledge carried by people we might be tempted to underestimate. Never mistake quiet competence for lack of expertise. Never confuse humility with weakness. And never assume that the most capable person in the room is the one making the most noise." The legend of Dr. Rebecca Hayes became more than military folklore. It became doctrine, a living reminder that true authority isn't granted by rank or position, but demonstrated through competence under pressure. That legacy isn't what you proclaim about yourself, but the standard of excellence you set for others to follow long after you've completed your mission and moved on. Thank you to everyone who typed quiet in the comments. Your support honors every quiet professional who proves their worth through action rather than announcement. If these stories of silent expertise and earned respect inspire you, please subscribe to help us share more incredible tales of dignity under pressure and competence that speaks for itself. Until next time, remember that true expertise doesn't need to announce its arrival. Sometimes it just carries a mop and waits for wisdom to recognize excellence.